Okay, welcome back to ICE. What we're going to do in this video is to just look at a couple of examples of DHTML. Remember, DHTML stands for JavaScript plus CSS plus HTML. So this trio, if you like. And we're going to look at a couple of examples where you combine these three different languages, if you like, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, to design pretty interesting websites. So here's one. So if you look at this, this is styled using tables, using HTML tables, and there's some CSS being used here, as well as JavaScript. Now JavaScript is used to implement dynamic behaviors. So for instance, if I click on this, I get hello. If I click on there, I get this. If I click on aloha, I get this. Click on sir, you get this. So these dynamic behaviors have been implemented using JavaScript. Now, I'm viewing this in Safari, and Safari has a number of different features. Like if you go to develop, you can go into responsive design mode. And responsive design basically is design that responses to the different types of form factors that you have. So you can look at how this web page is going to look when viewed using different devices. So for instance, iPad, it looks like this. iPad Air 2 looks like this. So kind of fixed width. Right? iPad Pro, it would look like this, right? Because you get a larger screen, and then in sizes of other resolutions, if you like. That's what it looks like. And we'll come back to this idea of responsive web design a bit later. And you can also look at how it will look like under different types of browsers. So in IE 11, it will look like this. So let's look at the page source for this. So you can see that this web page has been created using the tables. So we're using tables, HTML tables, to create a layout that we see here, the rectangular layouts. And we've seen right from week 1 that rectangular layouts have balance and regularity, and it is kind of the shape to use, mainly rectangles. And you can see the use of HTML certainly, and we have also used a link to an external style sheet, and the external style sheet is a very simple one in this case, just giving the black background that you get at the start here. And then we have some JavaScript functions. Now you notice that the JavaScript functions are used to implement a dynamic behavior. In other words, what happens when the user clicks on the website. So when the user clicks on hello, this function change main1 will be called. And let's look at what change main1 does. So this is change main1, and you can see that it will first of all get a reference to main. And what's main? Well, it's one of the blocks in here. Let's look for a block with that ID equals to main. So this is it. So that's the main block. And document.getElementById by ID main will obtain a programmatic reference to this particular block here, which actually on the page corresponds to this black portion here. And so if anything that we assign into the inner HTML variable of that object here will appear here. So, and that's why when we click on it, we get this, right? So this hello is coming from there. And then we also change the style, and we can use this, we can make use of this set attribute function to do so, which actually applies a style sheet to this particular part of the page. So you notice that we change the attribute style to contain this value, and that's the same as if you had typed, and you would have got the same effect, right? So setting the attribute style to be of this value, right, that's the same effect as what this line of code does. And of course, you can also update CSS rules. You can access the style sheets of that particular page and access it, and even update the rules dynamically, but we won't go into that. Let's look at change main2. So in change main2, right, so when you click there, it's very similar to change main1, except that you have there. And then if you look at aloha, it's going to be very similar. And then the next one, you're going to have that, which is a table which is inserted there. Here's another example, and This example uses a bunch of boxes to create a more fancy layout instead of those layouts where you just have straight edges. Now, you could do this layout if you wanted this kind of overlapping boxes. You could do this in tables as well, but it might take you a long time because it's very hard to divide up the screen. But this is a lot more easily done using CSS for layouts. And as you may have seen from a previous module, that to do this, you can make use of div blocks and style sheets. So let's look at the code. So if you look at this code, it's pretty short. And what you see here is a whole bunch of div boxes. So you got box 1, box 2, and box 3. 3 div blocks, which is box 1, the dark blue one, and then the light blue one, and then the white box, box 3. And these 3 are all enclosed within a container box. So this is quite a typical way of doing CSS layouts. And then what you do then is to write style sheets, and I have 2 style sheets here that will be used to position these boxes in different ways. Now you notice that I've used 2 style sheets. Why not have just 1 style sheet? Well, the idea of using 2 style sheets is that you can have styles which apply to the entire website, to every page on your website. And these styles, the rules for these styles might be stored in site.css. For instance, you want all the pages to have a yellow background on your website, let's say. So you can have a rule that says that the background should be yellow. That rule could be in a site style sheet, site.css. But then for every page, you might want to have some styles as well. And you have some styles which apply to the entire page, but just to that page. You can put all those style rules in page.css, for instance. So you got one CSS style sheet, site.css, for styles that apply to the whole website, to every page on that site. And you might have another style sheet for styles that are specific to that page. So a different page might use site.css and some other page.css, right? So page1.css with site.css. Another page might be page2.css with site.css, and so on. So that's the idea of having site style sheets as well as page style sheets. Let's look at site.css and page.css. What's in there? And that style sheet can be imported into every page on the website, which means that every page on the website will have by default the background color of yellow. Now, what's the advantage of setting the background color in one style sheet? And this same style sheet can be then imported into every page on the website. Well, if you wanted to change the background color of every page on the website, you don't have to go into every page and change that. Right? What you just need to do is to change site.css. So if I change this to some other color, so I wanted to have a green background, I just need to change it in one place. That's in site.css. So if I change this to green, and because every other page on the website is linking to site.css, then if this is changed to green, then every other page will have the background changed to green. Okay, so we looked at site.css. Let's look at page.css. So you notice that page.css has a couple of rules here. In fact, it has 1, 2, 3. There are 4 rules here. And let's see what they do. You can see here that that the container is styled. So you notice that we first styled the container. We fixed the width to be 700 pixels. And if we want, we can set margins. And then we then say there should be solid margins, the width of 3 pixels, and that's why you see this line there. And it's auto in a sense that it will be centered. Right? So remember that if I resize that, you notice that this fixed width remains centered. And if I were to change the size of that, so you can notice that this 700 pixel width, that part here stays centered. No matter what size of the window I use, it's always centered. So that's the margin colon auto here. And then box 1 is the first box, and you can, relative to the top is minus 10 pixels, the left is 20 pixels, and it's 600 pixels by 800 and by 80 pixels. So the height here is 80 pixels, and the width here is 700 pixels. And the position relative to the top is minus 10 pixels, right? So you can notice that this is the border here, and this is slightly at the top because down here is 0, right? If you think of the position here, here is 0, and then minus 10 is a bit higher, 10 pixels higher than that line there. And then you have left of 20 pixels, and this part here, you notice that's the margin. So there's about 20 pixels width here. This here is 20 pixels. And then you have the second box, which is the light blue box. Now, what do you mean by relative positioning? Relative positioning means relative to its default position. So its default position is somewhere down here, and minus 20 pixels means it's 20 pixels higher than its default position. And left is 100 pixels, that means it's 100 pixels to the right. Now, in this left here means left padding. So it's 100 pixels to the right of its default position. And in other words, this part here is 100 pixels. And the one at the top, the left is 20 pixels. So there's 20 pixels here. And then there's 100 pixels here. And then the height is 130 pixels. The height of this light blue box is 130 pixels. And the width is 160 pixels. And these are the colors, right? Notice it's a light blue background color. And similarly with box number 3, left 140 pixels, and that's why there's extra 40 pixels here. So 140 pixels to its original position, and so on. Now, this is relative to its default position, right? So if, for instance, we wanted to find out what the default position is, we can always comment out some of the style sheets and then see what we get. Suppose we were to comment out this. So in other words, we wanted to see what its default position is if we didn't change it. Okay, so if we took out the positioning, let's see what we'll get. We get something like this. So that's, you notice that that's the default position of the 3 boxes, and you can experiment with that. So relative to its default position, let's look at box number 2. And relative to its default position, we want to move it up by 20 pixels. We want to move it to the right by 100 pixels. So if we just change that, notice that's what's happened, right? So we have moved it up by 20 pixels. We have moved it to the right by 100 pixels. And that's, for box number 3, we want to move it up by 105 pixels. We want to move it to the right by 140 pixels. So if we just change this, save, and there we go, right? And similarly with box number 1, if we were to just change it, and then we do it again, and there you go, right? So it moved 10 pixels above its default position, left padding, or moved right by 20 pixels. And if you wanted to move it more, let's say by 120 pixels, let's change that to 120, and notice that it moved to by 120 pixels. So let's move it back, and so on. So that's how it works. Now this is different from absolute positioning. With absolute positioning, you're positioning those blocks not relative to its default position, but with respect to the window absolutes. So if I were to change this to absolute coordinates, let's see what we'll get. For box number 2, will be like this, right? So we notice that the top was 100 minus 20 pixels. So this at the border, it's actually position 0. Right? You imagine there's an axis there. There's position 0, and it's moved up by minus 20 pixels. So it's kind of above. So if I move that down, right? Let's see what we get. So we move down. So 20 pixels space at the top there, right? So that is actually the position 0, and I've moved left by 100 pixels. So if I reduce that to 10 pixels, let's see what we get. Right, so you notice that there's about 10 pixels away from the width of the window. So when you can change the position of the window, or you move this forward, let's say. So what has happened here is the absolute position is a position not relative to the default position of box number 2, but it's relative to the top left-hand corner of the window. So imagine where this arrow is pointing to right now. That's 0, 0. And then 20 pixels down, right? So imagine this is 20. And then 10 pixels to the right. Right, this is there, right? Or left padding and top padding by 20 pixels. And that pushes the box there. Here's another example. And this shows the combination of using tables and CSS for layouts. So you can just do layouts using tables alone, or you can use layouts using CSS alone, or you can combine them. And if you look at the page source here, we are using CSS to do the layouts of the boxes, box 1, 2, and 3. Right? There's div boxes which are styled using the style sheets. But inside each box, this part of the page, we have used the HTML tables. Right? So you can do layouts by combining HTML tables with div blocks. Okay, we'll look at more examples later. Okay, so here's an example of a website created using JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. The dynamic behavior is done using JavaScript, so when I click on different menu options, it changes, right? And I'm using JavaScript to make that change. So it's only a certain portion of the page, which is this main portion, that has been updated. So this is a website for information about a workshop, but you can imagine something similar for a company website. I don't have a particular logo here, that is. And then you have a space which changes according to the options that you select. And then you have some background image and allow scrolling. Later on, we will look into the details of this web page, including looking at the source code, how that's actually has been implemented.